Awesome. Welcome back, everybody. Uh, we're excited to be rolling once again. Thomas Breitbach rejoining you with the Wisconsin Runner podcast with the peerless Spencer Agnew.
How's it going, everybody? Thomas, how are we doing this fine morning?
It's good, yeah. I did a little bit of working out this morning, so kind of moving the body and pushing things just a little bit in a not crazy hot, but a little bit warm day. So we'll take it. How about you?
Yeah, love it, love it. It's so yesterday evening felt great because we're going through some heat recently, so it was like it's beautiful out. And I actually am taking the day off because I'm doing a 10-hour event tomorrow. So it's one of those like I just want to go for a run right now. I really just want to go outside, but I think it's probably smartest for me to take off and then get ready to roll for 10 hours tomorrow. So that should be fun. It should be an adventure.
No doubt about it. Yeah, that's a unique territory to be stepping into.
Yeah, for somebody who's only run 22 miles as their longest run in their life and now going to 10 hours, do as I say, not as I do, I guess is the motto there.
Yeah.
uh, but it'll be fun. It'll be fun. So let's get into a little bit more of like, I don't know, tactical type discussion. And I think this week kind of brought forth this topic. I know with a lot of athletes that I'm working with, I'm sure athletes that you're working with, but we in our region are dealing with some heat and humidity. And I know people are going to say, "Ah, it's not really hot there. It's not really humid, whatever." It's a change, right? So it's a change in the weather and something that we haven't been dealing with and we're not acclimated to. So I think today let's talk a little bit about like effort-based training, right? And what this time of year for a lot of people needs to be and looks like compared to a more specific portion of the year. So, Thomas, I guess first thing for you, effort-based training. Is this something you utilize?
Yeah, it's sort of more. I know there's a lot of ranges. There's some very like sort of quantifiable scales, as much as quantifiability with subjective feel is there. Kind of you got your classic RPE stuff where you associate different levels. But kind of yeah, just we talk a lot about like what's the feel like, what's the internal sense of the effort like, and kind of like how much does it feel like we're on the edge, near the edge, over the edge. So talking about a lot of different ways and slightly different types of language, but I think even as we get into more specific stuff, we're still talking about effort. So effort is both really appropriate this time of the year and is a skill that we want to have all the time.
Yeah, agreed. And it's something that yeah we use whether it's the athlete I'm working with or high school athletes, like all year round, even when we're in a very specific block of training, getting ready for a race, like we talk about effort, right? There's certain portions of that workout that are purely effort based. And then obviously there's other times where we're giving prescriptions from a pacing standpoint, right? We're trying to hit a specific execution of that interval or a specific zone or whatever. Like there's different specifications there. But for me, a lot of times it is effort based. And I know you talk about different metrics, right? Of RPE or we use like race specific feels a lot of times, right? Like run at what feels like marathon effort or half marathon effort or 5K effort. Or we use that a ton. And I feel like generally it depends on the individual I'm working with how we discuss those things. And we try to discuss those things in unison. But for people who are coming to this as a newer athletes, it's hard to say what their half marathon pace is, or maybe they haven't raced in a while. I don't know what half marathon effort feels like. I haven't been there in a long time. So I like to still have that discussion because it's a skill they need to acquire, right? We need to learn how to feel the effort so that when they're out in a race and things aren't quite right or the heat's a little bit more oppressive that day, they can feel what that feels like. But then
Yeah.
I use RPE quite a bit. And a lot of that, I think, is as a physical therapist, I use RPE when dosing strength training, right? So there's a lot of, from the strength training world, a lot of this idea of reps in reserve for how hard should you be working when you're doing something. Well, how many reps in reserve do you have? And that has been found to correlate pretty well to an RPE scale. So I'll use that a lot, but I think that's primarily because day to day I'm dealing with that when I'm working with physical therapy clients. But then we talk about that as well. Of, okay, what does this kind of 1 to 10 scale of effort feel like, and how does that feeling correlate to a specific race effort feel? And we always try to like, oh, a 6 out of 10 might be like threshold effort, and you're working your way up to an 8, and maybe like an 8 to 9 is like getting the 5K on up or whatever. But it's hard individual wise. So we both use it. My question to you is why?
Yeah.
Why do you use it? Why do you use effort?
I think primarily because I'm really bad at predicting. like the future and even the present sometimes. That like I will often have athletes reach out for like kind of really like, hey, like what are the target windows? I think can help with that, but a lot of times we'll be talking about like there could be a 20, 25 to 30-second window for like what might be in that effort base.
Yeah.
Um, so I try to like, point them to the right department at Target, but I can't tell them which aisle they're going to find what they're looking for. So learning that skill so that like they've always got themselves with them. They rarely have, you know, somebody there in the race, especially, let alone even at workout sometimes. So cultivating, like you say, building that skill of how do you check in to see is this sustainable? Is there more? Like being able to do that imperfectly lets us learn from that. And really a good chunk of the season here, whether it's kind of that like December through February or that kind of June through early August, both in terms of where we are in the training cycle most of the time, as well as what the conditions are like out there. Like there's X factors that take those more precise target paces and can throw them out the window. If it's, 11 degrees and, a wind chill of negative something, or if it's 95 degrees, we've got to be able to say, hey, like what's going on inside me, and be able to use that to like get an appropriate amount out of the day.
Yeah, I think it for me I use it all the time, and I strongly believe that this is the best way that a lot of athletes, especially starting out, should be performing, should be training. Um, but there's a lot of reasons why. One is I'm not going to be there at your race with the stopwatch following you the entire course of your marathon. You're also not going to run your marathon on a treadmill where you can set the pace and just continue to go, right? There's ebbs and flows, there's elevation changes, there's temperature changes throughout the race. There's temperature changes day to day, right? So there's a lot of other factors that'll play a role, and those external factors definitely can play a role in how you execute the race and pacing of that race, right? Like if you go to a hillier marathon course or half marathon course, yeah, your paces are going to be different. You're going to execute that race a little bit different than if you're just on a flat, fast, looped course or something like that, right? Um, we also, in general, try to preach that you run races to win, right? You run races to. I always tell the athletes it's just a foot race, right? We're just trying to see who can get to that line first, and races don't always go at a specific pace, right? There's times where there's pace changes, there's ebbs and flows, there's variations within that, and we can use these changes in effort to try to mimic how that race is going to play out. But so much of our world is stuck in this watch that tells us what a specific pace is, and oh, I'm supposed to be this fit, so I need to run at this pace, right? And I think that's a mindset that I try to avoid, mindset I try to get people away from. So there's all the physical benefits of effort-based training, but I think there's a huge mental benefit of effort-based training where it gives you the confidence to know that you have that internal feel to what's going on. You can go out and say, all right, today I'm gonna run at this effort. And I bet I'm running close to this pace. Boom, you look at your watch, guess what? You're right on the pace that you want. And if we can teach athletes to have that internal feel, we know that they're going to be able to execute really, really well without having to trust or be reliant on this watch. How many times have we had athletes go to a race and the mile markers were off? Right. I
Yeah,
tell this is a story I tell my high school athletes every single year. My senior year ran at Nike Cross Regionals. I was up in the top 10. I was honestly looking back, I was running the best race of my life. I was up there near the front. I could see the leaders, and I felt like we were working really, really hard. Like I was suffering out there. I got to the 2 mile clock and it said I went through in like 10:15 or something like that. And I'm thinking to myself, 10:15, like, uh, how am I suffering so bad when the clock says 10:15? Right. So I gave that time the value instead of listening to how I felt. So I was a mess then. I slowed things down. I kind of bagged it in, ran really poorly that last mile. Looking at my splits afterwards, the clock was at a different point than the mat. And the mat I actually had gone through in like 9:52. And if I had known that I was going through at 9:52, I would have been like, oh, well, that makes sense why I'm suffering so bad, but I am crushing it. I could run a huge
yeah,
PR. Right. So I tell my athletes all the time, like, we can't let those external variables, that clock, the watch, dictate how we feel, right? Dictate what's going on between our ears. we need to be able to have that control and understanding of where our body's at.
Yeah. No, I think that sense of purpose in the effort can add a lot of power and be able to say, okay, like that lets us dial in or dial up however we need to. And like in a race setting, like that's so powerful to kind of have that connection there. And I think if we're looking to maximize race and training performance, being able to read like, okay, where are the times where I can go get a little bit more? Where are the times where I need to check down a little bit? Like if we are really good at that and you can do that in the aggregate, 2 workouts a week, 40 weeks a year, like that person is going to get X% better than someone that is not as tuned into that skill set. And I mean, that's where the game is won. Like if you could do that consistently, like you're going to level up over people that are the same physical skill set as you.
Yeah, yeah. If any of my athletes hear this, they're going to hear a common phrase: extraordinary outcomes come from doing ordinary tasks for an extraordinary amount of time. So it's the aggregate. It's that 40 weeks that you're talking about. It's not, oh, I crushed workout on one day. I hit this glorified pace for one day. It's what work can you stack up over and over and over again. And understanding that on a given day, you may not have slept well the night before. You may not have ate well. You may not have hydrated as well as you were. Maybe you're coming off of a big, heavy day of work or of school or of some other life event that was an uncertain circumstance. So, are you supposed to hit this glorified pace on that day, or should you try to run the effort that was intended for that workout? I'm a big believer in running the effort that was intended so we can continue to stack work after work after work instead of saying, well, today I've got to run 6 minutes for this workout because that was what was prescribed. And then you dig yourself a deeper hole coming out of a state of more fatigue. And that's a hard thing. I know as an athlete, it was a hard thing for me to deal with because I was so ingrained to what my watch said or what Strava said or what other athletes were doing. And instead of understanding what does Spencer need, right? And you got to look in the mirror and say, what do you need on that day? And when an athlete can do that, my goodness, the sky is the limit. You can see that transformation occur.
If we were good at embedding videos or being able to point and say there's a link right here to something, I'd say it sounds like you say like we should do less sometimes. But yeah, that's a whole other conversation.
Maybe check below. We'll post some information about doing less.
Yeah,
Doing less is more. Sometimes you got to slow down to speed up.
yeah,
Big philosophies that we have. So, all right, I think we hammered home some of the effort based things, right? And not always living by the pace on your watch, the heart rate that you can see, or and I know Garmin now has, I'm sure Coros does too. I have a Garmin, so for me, it's that's what I know most. It has like the workouts you should do on that day, right? Because of what your HRV was and your training loads, et cetera, et cetera. And it's awesome to have those metrics. I still use those metrics personally. Like I like collecting that data because it gives me a little insight, especially heart rate. Like if I am feeling pretty good, but I can tell my heart rate's rising. Okay, maybe I am not as aware of the fatigue that I'm under, or maybe this is a precursor to me getting sick, or something. There's something else that's off. So it's not like we need to neglect those things, but I don't think those things are the driving force to what you do each and every day. It's kind of how I imagine it. So I don't want to throw all these metrics under the bus and say, nope, these are worthless. They are very valuable, right? And Thompson, I think you would say we use pace for a lot of workouts, right? Like there's a lot of days where we are prescribing paces, but we modify those paces a lot of times based off of effort and feelings and things like that.
yeah, without a doubt.
So it's a tough time of year, right? Heat, humidity. We're also in, for some people, more of this kind of like base. I know we've got a big race coming up this weekend for people, but if they're in more of that base building phase and they need something, I would say more like unstructured. Um, what are some of your, I call them workout snacks? Like what are some short things that you can get in that can be effective, but in this time of year can work well with that idea of feeling?
Yeah. Um, I think really working with the seasons is pretty big, where doing stuff that's shorter, faster, working on mechanics and sort of turn on speed, power, and even introducing in really manageable doses like anaerobic work. So like I really love just like adding in drill strides and hill sprints as sort of a day that really lets us work on something that like if you're running for 10 seconds really hard with complete recovery, conditions like heat and humidity don't impact that the same way that like a 5 mile tempo get impacted. So I think it's something that we want to be doing this time of year. Conditions are great to be able to kind of have that like maximum muscle force production, and at least high end muscle force production for runners. Um, and it's something that like taxes us in the right sort of way. So I really enjoy hill sprints as kind of a way to make a moderate day out of like, hey, like let's go get 14, 15% of your weekly mileage on a run, finish up at a hill, do a couple of drills and strides, and kind of work on purposeful movement. Hit 3 to 6 hill sprints where you're going for 10 seconds at 95+% of the top gear, but with big recovery in between. And that's something that like maybe going to feel a little bit sore a day or two afterwards, but is a big difference than just kind of running easy pace, and something that we can use to translate into more race specific stuff as we go, but something that we feel the impacts of the conditions a lot less doing something that short and that powerful than a lot of other things we do.
Yeah, I think it still allows you to be very purposeful with that day on a day where you might not have wanted to get out the door, or you may have had something else planned, but it's going to be too much given the conditions. But there's a big purpose behind doing that, right? Like moving really well and generating power and force is the definition of running, right? Like that's how we move forward, how we increase speed is by generating force. The biggest thing with I absolutely love hill sprints. Personally and for my athletes. I feel great after doing hill sprints, but so selfishly for me, like love them, love them. Biggest mistake I see is people treat them like hill repeats, where they're running up, jogging down, running up, jogging down, just like cycling through, and not remembering, because most of us endurance athletes are endurance focused, right? We're all aerobically minded. So we think about it like, okay, I can't stop. Like I'm not a sprinter. I can't rest. Um, you have to rest, right? Like for these, the purpose, the focus is force production, power, and how well you move. And if we are going into each one in a heavily fatigued state, we're not going to move very well. We're not going to generate as much force and as much power. So I think a big thing for that is enjoy the weather, enjoy the sunshine, the sunshine. Stand at the bottom of the hill for a little bit longer, right? Like take that recovery on those hill days is the biggest recommendation I can give people, because it's going to allow you to execute really really well. Um, for me, it's the same sort of thing. Like I think the smaller doses of intensity are better on at days like today, or days like when we have this week we have heat and humidity and things like that. I like doing things like ins and outs, I call them, or diagonals. So doing, if you're on like a track and you do like, you can jog the turns, stride the straightaways, and you can run that stride at whatever effort you want, right? Like I've done a bunch of weird different workouts this year, where I've done some at like a threshold effort, and then I've kept the other 100 as like a steady float type thing. And then you just kind of like keep that pretty consistent, or you do them harder and a very slow jog recovery. And you can stress different systems that way. And a 100 meters on, 100 meters off can be a totally different workout from one day to the next. It just depends on how you modify that pace and that speed. I think it was last week I actually did the diagonals where I was on the soccer field. So running on the grass, get a little bit more soft surface work in. The cross country season's coming up, so I'm trying to get on the grass a little bit more in preparation for that. And I'd run. For me, I was just steady at the diagonal, and then I would run easy for the short side, like the end line, then of the soccer field, and then just run steady, run easy, run steady, run easy. And you can again modify the effort there. It doesn't have to be a sprint, right? But it doesn't have to be like a slow jog. Like I was running, so for me, like around 5 minute pace. So it was something that was probably a little closer to like critical velocity type work for me. And then jogging super chill for that short 25-second duration and doing it again. And I did 10 minutes of it because that was the random number that I decided, hey, I wanted to be able to get, I had this much time in my day to get home for the kids. I got 10 minutes of work. Run to the high school, do this, run home. But those are two like other like unstructured, short amounts of intensity bouts that you can do and really modify whether you need a speed power day or an aerobic based day.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we do a lot of like when we do fartleks or when we talk about fartleks, a lot of times it is pretty prescriptive that it's like, hey, it's going to be exactly this time, exactly this amount of rest. Still a relative effort for what, tempo would be or CV would be or something like that, that like we can get really dialed in, but to kind of have a lot of fluidity, kind of have true fartlek in like kind of the organic feel of like, okay, like how much to push, how much to recover is really, really great for the true this time of the year effort-based stuff. Um,
Yeah.
Kind of an
Yeah.
extrapolation of the 100 on, 100 off that I like is minute on, minute off.
Exactly.
something that can be kind of just a little bit extended where we can, tap into a little bit of an anaerobic gear or kind of just make it smooth running and that's, faster than tempo or easy pace running. And then the recovery can be, that can be a float recovery to kind of keep it a steady aerobic day, or it can be, if we're hitting those minutes really strong, can be a really, shag jog, 800-meter runner recovery in between. So it's a really dynamic session. And like those sessions, they can be both. Like you can start off with kind of those steady hundreds, float hundreds, or steady minutes, float minutes, and then work into more aggressive attacking. And we're kind of blending those pieces together so that they, we're able to kind of combine forces if that's what feels right for a session for us early in the season.
Right. And the beautiful thing is it can change depending on how you're feeling. Right. So all this is about effort and about feel. And if you feel like, all right, the weather might hinder me a little today, but I want to be a little aggressive with it early on, or maybe I want to be cautious early on. Like you can change that throughout the workup, but that's the beautiful thing about having it more unstructured is it gives you the freedom and the understanding that you can do that and to feel okay knowing that that can change. Um, for something a little longer, I like progression runs for like if okay,
Mhm.
I want to do a little more sustained, longer effort. But again, if it's a progression run, like there's no this pace for this many minutes, this pace for this many minutes. Just if you feel good, like gradually increase the pace, right? And just like shift down slowly over time. I think it's an awesome way to get in some aerobic work. I like it from an execution standpoint, especially for some of our longer distance athletes, because that's how we want to execute their race. And if we can have that naturally float instead of the way that I was as an athlete of like it'd go 0 to 100 and I wasn't very good at this like gradual drive. It was just like on and off. I think it's good at teaching some skills. And again, it gives them the control, the athlete to control to make it whatever they need to on that day based off how they're feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of that aggregate thing that we talk about, that if we do these sessions the right way or sort of the appropriate way with the effort once, it's a great session. But if we do them consistently over 6 or 8 weeks of summertime or wintertime, that's really where we get it. Like I think on the far end of the spectrum, like I often feel like, oh, I should be prescribing these certain types of long runs, like that kind of like, hey, this week it's this type, that's type, it's that week. But honestly, I believe that like this time of the year, like, some weekends are going to be really hot, some weekends are going to be great, some weekends we're going to, have been at a wedding or been working all day before that. Like that it's again hard to predict the future, but if we run, 4 or 6 weeks of appropriate effort long runs that like, hey, like when it needs to be just an easy time on the feet run, it's a time on the feet run. When it feels smooth cutting down or just kind of getting grooving, talking about stuff with a training partner, that's great when that happens organically. That if we just do that over the long haul, we'll get to that sort of late summer, early fall time of year when we want to be fit right on time.
And letting it organically happen is a beautiful thing, right? So going out there with sometimes without necessary prescription and just like whatever happens, happens is awesome. Um, to be great, you just have to be good consistently, right? You don't have to have these 100% blow it out of the water days. Just show up, be good. It's going to be in a good spot. Awesome. Anything else, Thomas, or is that a wrap?
I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. So we gotta close it out. Like I think this was a really good practice in an organic session of being able to talk through stuff too. So we look forward to the next chance to be able to talk about this awesome sport and awesome state we get to share with you folks.